Where are you? Connecting? Can't see you yet, Joe. Can you hear us? Oh dear.
Joe, you were on mute, I think.
Yeah, she's on mute anyway. Yeah. No, that's Graham now. Oh no, there she is.
Yes.
Oh, yes, yes.
Hurrah! Oh, great.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Right. Well, we've had some problems in getting everybody in, and there should be an awful lot more people coming, I think, Philip. Have you got anybody else in the waiting room?
No, no.
Nobody else. Can you keep an eye on it? Because perhaps they're all having difficulty in getting in, but there were at least 7 or 8 extra people, quite apart from the group members.
I haven't had alerts to admit anyone else, but I'll keep watching it.
4, 5,
Can you keep watching, Millie? I think some people must be having difficulty in coming,
13.
in getting through. What do you think we should do? Get hold of people or not? Contact you. I haven't got any telephone numbers. I've only got email addresses. I've got to start, right. Okay, well, welcome everybody who is here, and especially welcome to our speaker, Jo. And she says that she is the service manager. Well, somebody else is there, Marilyn and Bob again. This is ridiculous. The service manager of the Southwest Surrey Domestic Abuse Outreach Service. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yes.
Hi,
So I think.
sorry.
Yes, carry on,
Right,
Jo.
no.
Can I pass over
Okay.
to you?
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jo. I'm from Southwest Surrey Domestic Abuse Outreach Team, and I'm here tonight to chat to you about domestic abuse and how it's been affected by COVID-19 and the services that we're still offering to our clients, and sort of how you might be able to help us if you feel so inclined. So just a brief bit about domestic abuse. I'm sure you've all read lots in the press, and probably maybe have experiences or known friends that have experienced it. It represents 1/4 of all violent crime. It's about the use of power and control by one person over another, and it occurs regardless of race, ethnicity, age, class, sexuality. And I think that's the really important thing, and that's what I always say to people. It's not just about a statistical person we're talking. It's that lady that you see walking her dog every morning. It's the lady behind the post office counter, the nice dinner lady at school, the old man you see cutting his grass on a Sunday. It really does stretch through society, and the likelihood is that every one of us will at least know someone who's experienced it, if not have had personal experience in some way ourselves. So that's the most important thing, really. The more we all know about it and learn about it, the more we can help and raise awareness and let people know that there is support out there. So in Surrey, we were really lucky. The whole of Surrey is covered by outreach services. There are 4 partnership services that work together to cover the whole of Surrey, and my team covers Waverley and Guildford, so we have quite a big area. In Surrey, we call it domestic abuse, not domestic violence, and that reflects all the different sorts of abuse that people can experience. Psychological abuse, which will include name calling and threats, manipulation. Often the victim is blamed for it. It's your fault, you trigger me, you make me this way. And also gaslighting, telling them that your friends don't like you really, your colleagues are talking behind your back, that kind of thing, wearing down people's resilience and their self-esteem. There's also economic abuse, which we have a lot of in Surrey, actually, an affluent area, and that's about controlling access to money or resources. A perpetrator might take wages or have someone's benefits paid into his account, including like child benefit and things like that. They might stop the victim working. Often that helps with isolating the victim as well. Or they might put them into debt by taking out loans in their name. And again, it's not any particular area of society. I have had clients who are very affluent on the outside of things, BMWs in the driveway, Gucci handbags, children at private school, and yet have to literally get down on their knees and beg for money for nappies for the baby. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about economic abuse. Sexual abuse, and it doesn't have to be physical. Victims can be manipulated into doing things they don't want to do, or being filmed on camera, and then of course there's always a threat of everything being released on internet and that kind of thing. and coercive control, which is again about using patterns of these different types of abuse over time to exert power and control. Coercive control has recently been made a criminal offence. And again, good old Surrey. Surrey police were the first police force in the country to successfully prosecute for coercive control. It's quite a difficult thing to prosecute for because, as we said, it's a pattern of things that are happening, and it's often down to the victim to prove that this pattern of things are happening. But say Surrey police have successfully now prosecuted several people, but they did the first prosecution in the country once the law was passed. So they're really on it, Surrey police, which is great for all of us Surrey residents. Physical abuse, which is kind of traditionally what people think domestic violence is. Again, this is why we call it abuse, but it's not just hitting someone or punching someone. Throwing objects, throwing mobile phones at people, remote controls, things like that. The thing about physical abuse is it's often behind closed doors or in hidden places, so injuries aren't seen. Again, I had an example of a very high up army officer who'd been married to his wife for over 30 years, and he was very physically cruel to her. He would, when they went to officers' mess dinners, he would sit next to her and he would pinch her inner thighs really hard. She was black and blue on her inner thighs, and he would particularly pinch her and then ask her a question at the dinner table so that everyone would look at her. And you know, this poor lady just had to sort of try and save face and cope with this for years and years and years. So you know, say physical abuse isn't just a punch in the eye like we would maybe imagine or stereotypical. It's a lot of other things that can go on. And also more prevalently amongst the younger people, technical abuse. Abusive texts and messages through Facebook and social media channels, demanding access to their devices. So he might mirror your phone and see what messages and texts you're having, who you're corresponding with, who you're talking to on social media. Also tracking them with spyware that's on the phone. It's really easy. Again, particularly young ones in the clubs, they tend to, if they're asking for people's numbers these days, they tend to just give them the phone and they put their own number in. But there's just, especially on the Apple phones, there's just one button at the bottom. But if you press that, you've automatically connected them to your phone. And so you can then actually track where they are. So a lot of these young girls are finding that the same guy keeps turning up in places they're at, but of course they're tracking them so that they know exactly where they are. And again, with the tech, we get this threat of sharing images online, perhaps images that the victims wouldn't want shared. And I'm very conscious as I'm saying this that I'm using female examples as the victims and males as the perpetrators. But as we know, and it's International Women's Day today, it is a gendered crime. 90% of victims are women, and of the sort of 10% that are men, often the perpetrator is still a man, be it a partner or father or brother or family member. So I make no apologies. We do have male victims that we deal with, and we're perfectly happy to do that. And actually their stories are very much the same. A female perpetrator will use very much the same tactics as a male perpetrator does. And there are specialist services. There's a guy that works out of Woking that does a lot of work with us. If a man would prefer to speak to another man, which sometimes they do, we can provide that service as well. But we are happy to take on male clients. It's just that they are much, much rarer. But yes, I had to mention that. Sorry, because I automatically go into he and she, and I know it probably doesn't sound good if you're not aware of that fact. So domestic abuse is essentially a pattern of behaviour. It's not generally limited to a one-off incident. And again, really, us ladies aren't that silly. We don't meet someone who says, come in with me and I'm going to make your life a misery. You know, it's a behaviour that happens over a period of time and builds up. And it starts often with knocking down the victim's self-esteem, knocking her confidence, isolating her from friends and family, and then the actual abuse tends to start. So it's definitely a pattern. To make it domestic abuse, the survivor and the perpetrator have to be known to each other. So again, someone who's been in a relationship, they are in a relationship, or it's a family member, be it immediate family member or uncle or cousin, something like that. So that's what makes it domestic abuse. And obviously, unlike stranger violence, domestic abuse takes place behind closed doors and in private. rarely happens once. It tends to increase in frequency and severity over time, and we call that the escalation. And that's why we try and get in and intervene at an early stage, get our contacts to sort of refer to us quickly so we can get in there and help before things get to, you know, sometimes fatalities, sadly. So we want to get in as early as we can with our interventions. Okay, so really, I mean, COVID has obviously been a huge thing the last year. None of us can have avoided COVID, and it has affected domestic abuse hugely. You've probably heard in the news. The statistics tell us that there was a 150% rise in domestic abuse related searches on the internet during COVID. Nationally, around a 25% increase in calls to services like ours. Actually, my service has seen an increase of over 35%. So our workload has gone up, you know, over a third. And sadly, the average number of DA murders, domestic abuse murders, in March to April doubled to the highest figures in 10 years. And you're probably aware of the statistics that 2 women a week are killed because of domestic abuse, and equally 15 women a week, they reckon, commit suicide because of the relationships they're in. That was the old style statistics. We're talking both of those figures doubled during COVID. So, you know, an awful lot of worthwhile work to be done to protect these women in this high risk time. So of course, during COVID, you know, home's not been a place of safety for these victims of domestic abuse, and it is more important than ever for us now to reach these people. The lockdown measures that were designed to fight COVID have just given perpetrators the tools that they need to, you know, to use to their advantage, and that's exposed the survivors to worse domestic abuse, and it's also restricted their access to support during this time. 61% of women living with their abuser during lockdown said that the abuse had worsened, and more than 2/3, 68%, said they felt they had no one to turn to in lockdown. And you've got to think it's not just about the women in these relationships. You know, in lockdown, it was the children of the family too, possibly even elderly relatives that were living there. You know, the whole family is impacted by this domestic abuse within the lockdown. And it's been an
Joe,
yes.
sorry, Joe, can I interrupt for a moment? We were going to try and record all this.
Right.
But I have to ask, have you put the thing on yet, actually, Philip? Record? Because I just need to ask people
it's on as recording. It shows up on the screen that it is recording.
Okay, thank you very much. But if people don't want to show themselves at this point, please turn off your camera. Sorry, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, that's okay. So yeah, so basically lockdown's been the sort of ideal situation for abusive partners wishing to isolate their victims. There's been no work, so perhaps if she was able to work, she wasn't going into work, maybe working from home. Some things that you maybe would disclose to your colleagues, you're not going to do that if you're sitting at the dining table working from home and he's there as well. There's been no school, so no opportunity to meet school mums at the school gate or see the homeschool link worker or the teachers. And quite often we do get a lot of referrals from schools, and quite often that is a place where people will disclose what's been happening to them. They, you know, grow to trust the teachers, or perhaps even the children themselves disclose in class sort of things that have been going on, and we again get a lot of referrals that way. So there's not been that opportunity for disclosures, no one to recognise the signs of abuse, and no interaction with services such as social workers. I mean, certainly in the first lockdown we were having social workers ring us and say, you know, have you had sight of so and so, and all that people had to do was stay behind closed doors, even if the social worker was knocking or we were knocking. And if the perpetrator was in the house, you know, you knew they weren't being allowed to answer the door, but no one could prove otherwise. We weren't supposed to be out and about. Also, injuries, you know, no longer needed to be hidden or explained away. So we found a big increase in people with physical injuries and worsening injuries. And like I say, if no one's going to see her for a few weeks, it doesn't matter if she's got a black eye. You know, he doesn't have to explain that away. So we did find that injuries were worsening too. And also control of the home in general, finances, food, children, you know, control of all these things could be exercised without any challenges from professionals or friends or family. So we did find as well that perhaps children who had been shielded, and all mums try and shield their mum if their children, if this is going on in the home, but much more difficult if you're all in lockdown and it's happening, you know, it's a hotbed of abuse. So we also found amongst our clients who were separated that child contact was a really huge issue as well. And again, the perpetrators used this to their advantage. They would breach lockdown and force the women to take the children, you know, to see them, stating their rights as fathers, and etc., even though it meant there was an increased risk of contracting the virus. And also sometimes not returning the children, or restricting the women's access to their children, saying, oh, well, I think we've got COVID symptoms, we're all going to have to lock down together, you know, so sort of using it in that way. And I had quite an early experience of basically the police not knowing what to do. Well, let's face it, none of us really knew what to do the first few weeks of lockdown. But one of my cases was a woman who, the marriage had been going wrong for a long time. He was an abusive man, and she had disclosed to work colleagues and was kind of working her way out of it, looking for routes to escape the relationship. And then lockdown happened and things quickly became a lot worse physically. She had 2 children, one of whom had learning difficulties, so there was a bit of sort of extra worry there for her, and she was in this home with him trying to shield the children, the things getting worse and worse. Anyway, she liked to go jogging, that was her thing, and she went out jogging one morning just to get some fresh air and some space, and we were allowed to go out and exercise. This was about 2 weeks into the pandemic. When she came back, he'd locked the door, and he said he wasn't letting her in. She'd been out of the house, she may have caught coronavirus, and him and the children weren't letting her in. And things, you know, he was screaming and shouting, and she was trying to get in the house, and her 14-year-old daughter was actually hanging out of the window crying for her mum, screaming for her mum, you know, mummy, get me out of here. So she didn't know what to do, so she called the police. Obviously, I think most of us would in that situation, and the police arrived, and they really didn't feel they had the power to force their way into the home or to make him let her in. They didn't know what to do. They told her the best thing she could do is probably go and stay somewhere else for the night, and he might have calmed down in the morning. Well, of course he hadn't. He'd won that battle. But it was just a typical example of coronavirus was happening. We were all a bit scared and not knowing what was going on, and the police weren't really very equipped to know how to deal with these things. So happily it ended well, and she did manage, it just actually expedited her leaving the relationship, and she did get a place to rent, and eventually with the help of social services got the children out of that home, and it all worked out okay. But it was really traumatic for her, and she had to do some court cases which are also being held like this by Zoom, which, you know, you can imagine that's a very different thing. Usually if you're in a court, you would be protected from your perpetrator. There would be screens so that you didn't have to see them, often they would maybe see one then the other, but with the Zooming and with the telephone court cases, you almost have a direct line to that perpetrator, so they were able to bully them more. So that lots of things for the women were much more difficult in lockdown. There have been some measures taken. I mean, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The government quickly announced that the rules of isolation didn't apply if you were fleeing your home because of domestic abuse. So I did hear that message go out on the national news, and I hope that people got that actually they were allowed to move around the country or move in with their parents or friends, or, you know, move about if they were fleeing domestic abuse. And the other thing that happened that I don't know if any of you had heard about was the code word scheme, which was run by Boots the chemist and some of the supermarkets, and it was Ask Annie. So the idea was that if you're a woman that was suffering from domestic abuse, really the only places that were open were the chemists and the supermarkets, and quite easy to make an excuse why you need to go into Boots. Remember, you're probably being tracked by this guy. He might well be waiting in the car outside, timing exactly how long it takes you, you know, so it's very difficult for these women sometimes to even get to make that phone call. But if you went into Boots and said you needed to speak to Annie, they knew that was a code word, and they would get you a quiet room and a telephone and an outreach service number. and that was a lifeline that Boots did, again, pretty early on from the first lockdown. So that was available for women, and it still is today. You know, still in the situation we're in. Annie stands for Action Needed Immediately, but obviously sounds like you're asking for a lady Annie. So I think that was a really good initiative, and something that we had experience of as well. We had calls, 2 calls come through using that service, so we knew that it worked, and the women were so grateful for that. So we've been affected sort of hugely by what's been going on. I wanted to tell you a bit about the services that we offer and what we're doing for local women. We've got many different facets. I've got 5 adult outreach staff and 2 children's workers, because we also work with the children who have been affected by domestic abuse. The first thing is basically being there at the end of the phone for confidential telephone advice and support. We get probably about 75% of our referrals through the police, and they come in following an incident if the police have been called out, so things have got pretty bad to get to that stage. But equally we foster all our relationships with the local schools, with the hospitals, social services, so we get referrals in from those quarters as well. And our charter is that we will try and contact that person within the first 24 hours. Sometimes it's difficult if people have changed phone numbers or whatever, but obviously we make that first attempt call definitely within the 24 hours, and it's about 80% of people we manage to get hold of in the first 24 hours from receiving the referral. We're very client-led. They don't have to speak to us. They don't have to take our, if they've been referred, referral is usually with their consent, so usually they are at the point they want help. But again, sometimes people can get scared and change their minds. They get scared of intervention because that might mean repercussions at home. If the police turn up when they've gone again, that's worse for the victim if the perpetrator's going to take that out on her. So we have to be quite careful, obviously, and always ask for safe numbers. So we do a lot of advice, support, emotional support, telling them their options. We have links with housing and lots of local charities, and we can tell them what we can do for them, and they can take it at their own pace. We never tell them you've got to leave him. Obviously it's generally the best thing, but we're not going to force them to do that. We want to, if they are going to leave, we want it to be a managed leave. It's actually very dangerous to do a quick and unplanned leave. So we always sort of get them to get their documents in order, get plans made so they've got somewhere to go. It's quite a big thing. Some of that obviously may involve, if it's a high risk case, going to refuge. That really is a last resort. To go to refuge, you're going to somewhere way out of your area. If you've got children, you're taking your children out of school, you're leaving, you're not taking your own telephone number, you're not speaking to family or friends, you are leaving and leaving no trace. A sad fact about refuges, there are actually more donkey sanctuaries in this country than there are women's refuges. So going into refuge, although sometimes you may see this on TV programmes and as an option, it's actually quite difficult to get a refuge space, and sometimes we have to help with putting up in for a couple of nights, say in a hotel, while we're trying to get them a refuge space if it's someone that has to flee immediately. So again, we work alongside social services with that. Sometimes they fund it, sometimes the police fund it, sometimes we fund it if no one else can. It's very we'll do what we have to do to keep someone safe. Also with refuge, often they're going to the other end of the country or far away. Travel costs can be very steep. There is a system with the railway that we can actually get travel warrants for women fleeing for domestic abuse, and again that's been on the news fairly recently because they've just extended that scheme. So we usually have to try and get train tickets and organise that, but sometimes our ladies have gone themselves and just driven people away. Again, it's very much led by how much of a crisis situation we're dealing with. We do sanctuary scheme referrals, that's alongside the police. That's often for ladies where their relationship's split and perhaps he's being a pest and he's coming back and he's harassing her, or he's trying to break in the home, threatening. So the police will come out and they will assess where she's living, they'll assess how safe the doors and windows are, they'll look at things like outside lighting, how secure the fencing is, that kind of thing. and they will put in a recommendation, and alongside Surrey County Council will get the work done. So that often makes people feel much safer. And sometimes I can remember one of my clients saying to me just that one of the pieces of kit is a great big door jammer, that it's a bit like a car jack that jams under a front door, and there's no way that you're going to be able to break through that. And she said her little boy, he'd only been able to sleep since they had the jammer, and he would check that the jammer was in every night, you know. So things like that, sometimes it's psychological just to know all these measures are in place. We also do a lot of support groups, and we run the Freedom Programme, which is an empowerment programme. It was written by a lady who did a lot of research in prisons. She interviewed over 700 perpetrators that are in prison for their crimes, and asked them to write a letter to their 16-year-old daughter saying how they would avoid abusers. And from that, she realised there were sort of 6 to 8 sort of definite traits, if you like, of these abusers, and put together a programme all about how to recognise these, how these men would act, how to spot them, and basically how to avoid them, obviously, in future life. So we run this programme, and we have fantastic results from it. We run it in person. Without a doubt, it's usually about 8 women that attend. Without a doubt, at the end of every course, they've made a WhatsApp group. They're meeting for coffees. You know, so not only are they being empowered and learning about domestic abuse and understanding everything they've been through, they're also making really good friends who understand what they've been through, and that's as empowering as anything, you know. And that carries on after the courses have finished. And we've actually pushed through to remain doing those face-to-face in COVID times. We successfully did 2 Freedom courses between October and December. We had to risk assess up to our eyeballs, but we found a safe venue, and we had masks, and we had everyone 2 meters apart, and sanitizer, and the windows open, and you know, everything you can imagine, takeaway cups for the coffee, everything. And it was well worth doing, and people were just so grateful that we did it, and still happily have made their WhatsApp groups, and although they're not able to go out for coffees, they've gone for like walks around the park, and you know, and they're still remaining that friendship. So when restrictions are lifted, they've still got that sort of friendship base there. We're just about to start next week. We're running 2 more courses. So again, we've had to do all the risk assessments, but because it counts as therapy, it's a specially written program, so it is therapeutic and obviously rehabilitating. You know, we are able to run that, so that's something we've really pushed forward with, and we're really sort of proud of that, because it has been a lot of work to get everything in place. We also do a lot of training and raising awareness of domestic abuse. I'll talk to anyone I've been around the Rotary clubs and everyone else that will talk to me. And I train a lot at the hospital, at Royal Surrey County Hospital. We have close links with the midwife team up there. Sadly, pregnancy is a time 30% of domestic abuse starts during a pregnancy, which is a very sad fact. So midwifery is a good contact for us. And I also do all the safeguarding training. Any staff at the Royal Surrey, they have to go through the safeguarding days, and I do the section on domestic abuse for all of their training up there. And again, you know, talking about how it cuts through all lines of society, guaranteed every time I do training, I do it in the lecture theatre there, 2 or 3 people will come and talk to me afterwards, and a couple of those will be actually suffering, you know, these experiences. So that's the thing that hits me every time. Wherever I go, no matter who I'm talking to, there will always be someone who'll come up, you know, and be talking to me about their own personal experience of it. We also do a lot of, I like to call it sort of preventative training, and we do that as a workshop with children and young people, and that's called Healthy Relationships. And again, sounds very simple, but it's very interesting when you get talking to these young people, how their perception of what a girlfriend and a boyfriend should be, and the sort of pressures that they may feel, particularly the sort of 15 to 18-year-olds, you know. So if they haven't had much guidance, or they haven't had that role model, maybe their parents are in a domestic abuse relationship, and you know, that's what they're expecting, that's what they've learned in life. It's really useful work and really interesting work, and again, every time we do it, there's always a child that comes forward and, you know, really wants to talk about their worries about what's going on at home. So I really sort of champion that, and that's the way I see of preventing it in the future. You've got to catch them while they're young and teach them about healthy relationships. I mean, obviously all of our work involves liaising with professionals. We liaise with social services all the time. We will go to child in need meetings and child protection meetings and go along, you know, double buddy up with a social worker if there's a particular thing they want to talk about. You know, we're well known within all of the social services, and they will ring us for advice maybe on a case that they don't know how to deal with, alongside the police as well, who obviously we do training alongside and help out with cases that they might not be sure of. And I would say, you know, that's another great thing about working in this service. We get huge support from the police, and they respect us and our experience, and they will ask us and want to work alongside us. So that's a really positive thing. There's also a domestic violence court in Guildford, which happens every other week. Usually runs across 3 courts, and there's usually about 60 cases heard. So that's every couple of weeks. Again, showing you the volume of domestic abuse that comes to the court system, and of course not all of it does. A lot of it's unreported. We have an independent domestic violence advisor who goes along from our office. When she gets the court lists, she will ring every victim of the perpetrators that are being heard, and she will ask if they want restraining orders or orders that will keep them safe, because actually it's a much stronger order if you can get a restraining order through a court from a judge rather than a non-molestation order that a solicitor can offer you. So we really try and encourage the victims that we're talking to, you know, if they've got that opportunity and he's in court, that's the time to go for a restraining order. And actually a lot of them don't realise, even if they get found not guilty, even if they don't get a particular punishment, the judge will still often grant a restraining order to prevent anything happening in the future. So that's quite a lot of work that we do, trying to get these ladies restraining orders alongside the court work. We also represent at MARAC, which is a multi-agency high-risk conference, which happens once a month at the moment, but it's just about to go to twice a month because of the sheer volume of high-risk stuff that's going on at the moment, again, down to COVID. That's a sort of multi-agency meeting where the 20 sort of highest risk cases in the area that are deemed to be, you know, at risk of death, basically, is what we're talking about. We will discuss those cases. We'll come together with the other agencies, mental health, addiction agencies, police, us, housing, probation, all those people that are around the individual, and we will work out, is there anything else we can be doing to safety plan, to safeguard these ladies, and again, sometimes men, and we will you know, do what we can to take action points to make sure all the safeguarding is done. So lastly, the thing that we used to love doing that we haven't been able to do for the last year, we meet clients, we go out and meet them, and we chat to them, and we listen to what's happened to them, and we sympathise and empathise, and we tell them our stories and our experiences, and that it's all going to be all right, and that we believe them, and that is actually invaluable. And one of the things I say in my hospital training is the biggest thing you can say to someone if they're telling you this has happened to them is, I believe you. Because actually they've been told for months, years, however long it's been going on, no one's going to believe you. Everyone thinks you're a lunatic. You know, no one likes you. That their whole self-esteem has been knocked down so much that actually just the simple words, I believe you, are what they really, you know, need to hear. And clients will say that to us again and again. They will always remember the first person that said to them, I believe you, you know, and we can act on this. And again, the message is, you don't have to know huge amounts about domestic abuse. You don't have to be able to know the right words to tell them, but just to listen and then to say, I know there's people that can help you, it is life-changing for a lot of these women. So that's my message. You know, we are there, we're offering a service, we're offering a phenomenal service in my opinion. My ladies are working flat out. They're working overtime and unpaid overtime and answering the phone on a Friday night and all sorts of things. And they are picking up, you know, clients right, left and centre, and getting them on to better outcomes. So I'm very confident that we're offering a wonderful service and a service for the children. We have one-to-one work in school in normal times, and we run a program which was written by a child psychologist, which is based on art therapy, but it's an actual proper written program that brings them along a journey about feelings and emotions. We don't talk about domestic abuse with the children. It's about your feelings and emotions and coping mechanisms and how to manage these feelings. And we have great feedback from all the schools. Social services will often ring us and just want to get a kid on our program, but we do insist we're engaging with mum, because we need to know that mum's in a good place as well. And we also run workshops in the summer holidays, again based on art therapy and games and fun, but with that support for those children who have suffered a lot for the things that they've witnessed. We're just looking at our sort of plans going forward are to get a youth support worker. We're finding there's a big drop sort of when children hit 16 to when they hit sort of 21. They seem to sort of go off the radar. If they're getting mental health help, it drops off at 18, and then they have to start the process again as an adult, which can take another 2 years to get sort of diagnosed or to a therapist. So we're wanting to really intervene at that stage, and we do have a lot of young clients. I mean, my youngest client was 17. My oldest client was 81, so there's an age range for you to show you the sort of, how wide a range we deal with. But we're looking to employ someone to fill that sort of youth work role, because there's a point where the children aren't children anymore, but they're not quite adults, and lots of services drop out. But equally, that's often the point where relationships are happening, and if you've not got a good steer, things can go sort of terribly wrong. So that's a new project. We're also looking at more specialist work with sort of the BAME community. We have quite a lot of cultural stuff. Actually, a lot of the stuff that we have to deal with is with the travelling families. So we find culturally they're quite tough cookies to deal with, not for us, but it's very hard for a woman in that culture to talk to anyone, the police or us or anyone. It's hard for us to get to go and see them because they don't want you on their sites. It's they then would get sort of vilified by their community for dealing with us or even speaking out about what's happening to them. So we have quite a lot of sort of work with the travelling community, but we know we need to be doing things better. We need to be getting in there and getting them to trust us. I've got a client at the moment, a 70-year-old travelling lady, and she's had a hell of a life, but she's really come on board and really at the point now where she will phone me and say, I'm having a really bad day today, and whereas before it would take ages to get anything out of her. So again, a lot of our work is building relationships, building the trust and being there for them. So that said, really all this work's going on. We are commissioned by Surrey Police and Surrey County Council. We're a service that they recognise is needed, and we have a contract with our other 3 partners to cover Surrey and provide the service we do. But actually, as part of that contract, part of our agreement is that we would do a certain amount of fundraising for our own service, and that can be really hard, bearing in mind I've just told you my staff are all working 24/7. We're expected to fundraise just our little part for Waverley and Guildford over £100,000 this year, which is a bigger, yes, I can see some places doing that. Yeah, it's a lot of money. We can use things like if we get volunteers, for instance, that will work for us, we can kind of offset that. So we could say we've had 10 volunteer hours at say £11 an hour, so it's not all cash money, hard money like that. Or things like sometimes we will get donations at Christmas for toys for our vulnerable families, so we could say we've had £500 worth of toys and use that. And we get donations from churches and organisations, and also we do some bids for grants that may be available. We have had extra money because of COVID from the government, and again, you've probably heard about that in the news. But actually what's happened with the COVID money is it's been very ring-fenced. It has to be for a particular project, and in fact a lot of the pots we've had have to be spent by the 31st of March or they have to go back. Oh, I've disappeared, hang on. Again, sort of with that, we've applied for all the grants we can, but if we run off our feet anyway and we're all working extra hours, there's only so many extra projects we can take on. Do you know what I mean? It's been quite a sort of vicious circle, really. So we have taken some extra money, and we've done our best and been creative with things that we can do in COVID, and sort of still try to get ourselves out there and reach people. But really it's kind of going forward into the next year. Our financial year runs from April to April, and some of the COVID pots say we'll have to go back if we haven't spent them by the end of this month, which we won't have. But still going forward, when things start to open up, when people start going back to school and back to the workplace, more and more disclosures are going to happen. You know, still lots of people are behind closed doors. We know there's a big tidal wave coming of more clients and more people needing help, more children needing help. So we're really, you know, looking for funding into next year. And whether that be, if you're part of an organisation that might be able to help, if your employer might do charity things, or you might have a quiz night down the pub and want to raise money for us, you know, anything would be gratefully received. Or even if you aren't able to sort of think of someone, maybe someone you know does a charity run once a year or something, you know, it doesn't matter how much we get, we use every penny of it. We're a not-for-profit organisation. Every bit of money goes back into helping the children, helping the families, helping the mums. And also there's a certain amount of reserve we need. I was saying earlier about going to refuge, and like sometimes we have to just fund a hotel for a couple of nights because that's the only way that woman's going to stay alive, or, you know, fund a taxi ride because, well, I can give you an example of that. We had a lady, we got to refuge only 2 weeks ago. She had no English at all. We'd done all the intervention through a translation service. That's £200 an hour. And she also had a child who had Down syndrome quite severely. So, you know, it was quite difficult for her to get about or to do anything. We did have we found her a refuge space, luckily with a member of staff in it that actually spoke her language. So that was amazing as far as we were concerned. It was just the fact that she just could not go to the train station and get a train. She wouldn't even be able to ask, what platform do I go on? And plus she had her little boy who had, you know, severe sort of problems. It was just there was no way that she would be able to get on a train and manage that journey. And we just had to get a taxi for her. That was the only way she was going to get there safely and in one piece. And of course, you know, social services wouldn't stump the money. So we had to dip into our pot. So occasionally there are things like that where you just need a pot for these exceptional circumstances. And let's face it, it's exceptional times at the moment. And some of the stories we've been coming up against, you know, have been just those situations where, of course, you want to help someone, but if it comes down to who's going to pay for that, it's usually our service at the end of the day that does. So yes, I guess that, you know, part of me chatting to you today is if there's any way you can help at all, or you feel inclined to help us, that would be really lovely. But equally, remember that it's people that could be your neighbours, could be your friends, could be someone you've known for years and years and they've kept it so well hidden. It's very, you know, so please be aware, and please ask, you know, try to keep the communication going is the best thing, because often they're isolated or people make it awkward to talk. And if anyone does disclose to you, you know, just let them know there's a service there and they will be helped. They won't be forced into anything, but there's people to listen and help them. That's my message. So has anyone got any questions for me?
Thank you very much, Jo. That was very impressive, I must say. I can't believe how many services you're involved in.
I know.
You can't believe it either. I wonder if people would like to show a hand if they want to ask a question. Anybody, first of all? So many, I can't think which one to start with, really.
I know. I'm shocked. Can I just say I'm shocked by how many court cases you handle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that just from the Guildford and Waverley district?
No, actually, if they're coming to Guildford Court, which is where we work out of, usually they come from, say, Woking, Staines, that kind of area. You know, they'll come from out of area. They tend to send them to court out of area. So again, that's extra work for us, really. They're not even going to be clients that we're engaging with that are in our area. They're kind of extra people that are coming in that we still have to engage with and get the right result for them, and then they go back to their area. So, you know, it's quite a big task for really not a lot that goes on our figures, if you like, that goes on our KPIs for our funders.
But that's a shocking number.
Yeah, and remember, you know, the CPS don't prosecute a lot these days, really. They haven't got the manpower or the time or the resources. and that's really the tip of the iceberg. It is shocking when you think about it.
Definitely.
I think Tilika had a question. Can you unmute yourself, Tilika?
Yes, you are dealing with an absolute of a quantity of people who have reached such a stage that desperation is set in. And I think it's the prevention that is what we need, isn't it? We need assertiveness training for women, and we need men to learn to control. Why do they want to do this bullying? Because in the long term, it destroys the relationship. Probably started quite happily. So this prevention, there's no time because you're dealing with all these things that.
Yeah, it very much feels like fighting fire at the moment, I must admit, because everything's escalated. But I really believe in like I say, the healthy relationships workshops, in educating people, so people can spot it, because it is a crime that escalates over time. The more the perpetrators get away with it, the further they push it the next time. And so if we can all spot it earlier, that saves the fatalities, that saves, the really nasty injuries. And
Don't you think it's assertiveness training that so that it doesn't get to the injuries?
Oh, absolutely. There are perpetrator programs that are run. Unfortunately, to get on a perpetrator program, you have to have been basically sentenced at court. So it already has to have got pretty tough before you'll even get on a perpetrator program. They don't really work. What the perpetrators are given at the moment don't really work. I haven't actually heard of one successful case. That's not to say someone won't come up with some magic solution. I mean, it's just whatever we're doing at the moment isn't working. There's lots of things involved. There's the messages you get in the media, the music that the young people listen to. Like I say, it's such an eye-opener going and doing the healthy workshop courses with 12-year-old children. That's where we catch them, 12 years old, when they get into secondary schools. And often the expectations and how we teach it is, we talk about healthy friendships. So we talk about, if you have a good friend, they'll let you do what you want to do. You'll be allowed to wear what you want to wear. You can have other friends as well and mix with other people, and they'll encourage you and they'll support you. And when it comes to boyfriend girlfriend relationships, all the same rules apply, and that's how we teach it. And it's frightening how some of these young girls, think what should be expected of them as a girlfriend, aged just 12 or 13, and equally what the boys think they should expect from their girlfriend. And that's coming from media messages, from music, from all sorts of things. I think that there's many facets that sort of feed into this, the way that the youngsters sort of think. And again, a lot of it can be learnt behaviour, what's learnt at home. If they're living in an abusive household, we all mirror and learn from what we grow up with, and so there's education to be done there as well. And often the women that we help get out of these relationships, that's their biggest fear. I don't want my children thinking this is normal. I don't want them growing up thinking this is how you behave with each other. And that's why our child intervention is good as well, because obviously we talk about rights and wrongs, and that we don't hurt other people, and we support other people, and using all the right language about being a good person. So we do a lot of intervention, and I always push that, because of course prevention's better than cure.
Rowena?
Do you think the amount of domestic violence is increasing as a number per se, or are we just discovering more of it? And I mean, because presumably it's always existed to some extent.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. I think it's definitely increased because of COVID, but that's again an exceptional situation. But I think there is more awareness, there are more avenues. I mean, even things like the storylines in the soaps and things, aren't there, in Coronation Street and East End, kind of it's brought into the public domain more. There's been more legislation the last few years about different sorts of domestic abuse. I think people are being reached more and maybe feel they can disclose more. But equally, things like the way we live now, in olden days, people would all live in the same village, and you'd get married and probably still live in the same village. And these days we're spread all over the country, if not all over the world. So a lot of women are left without that support network they may have, or if they're working mums and they maybe don't get a chance to kind of build up with the toddler group mums, or all these sort of relationships that we build with each other. I think life is much more spread out these days, so perhaps we haven't got people to disclose to, people to tell, and we get more isolated. And when we're isolated, it's much easier for these perpetrators to wreak their havoc, really, because who are we going to tell, and who's going to believe us?
Can I ask, actually, if alcohol, is a big problem normally?
Yes, and
people are usually more violent when they.
Well, it's sort of twofold, really, drugs and alcohol. It can often be used as an excuse by the perpetrators, oh, I only hit you when I'm drunk type thing. It can be used as an excuse. We had an example of that with a guy who used to come home and beat his wife fairly regularly. But he would go after work every day to a club, and she would always say, oh, he only hits him when he's drunk, he smells a drink. And the police actually investigated this, because he eventually went too far and other people witnessed it, and it all became, not just her word against his, it was a witnessed crime. But actually in their investigation, they found out that he did go into the local pub after work, but he would order half a pint of beer, and he wouldn't always drink just that half a pint of beer. He'd just have a few sips, but he was perpetuating that he smelled of drink, he had alcohol in his breath, so he could say that it was the booze that made him hit her. Very manipulative, very thought out. But also sometimes we find our victims, they're using alcohol as a coping mechanism, they're using drugs as a coping mechanism, they're trying to block out or get through whatever they're having to endure at home. So we do work very closely with the drugs and alcohol people. Mental health's another thing. A lot of my clients will say, oh, I'm on antidepressants for anxiety. Well, of course you are. If you're living with that every single day of your life, yes, no wonder you're anxious, no wonder you're walking on eggshells. Stress can do terrible things to a body, and often these victims will have turned to all sorts just to cope, just whatever it takes to get them through. So we have a lot of work to do in both sides, really, around it being used as an excuse, and also that sometimes our clients are extra vulnerable because they've maybe taken to drink just as a coping mechanism for what's happening to them. But it definitely is intertwined, yes, and often there will be several problems coming into that relationship for various reasons.
Really? Yeah.
I was just going to ask, I assume you probably do, but can you help everyone, including sort of refugees and people looking, waiting for asylum?
Yeah, we don't turn anyone away. If we have had refugee situations, it tends to be more of a case of we know the right organisations to farm them onto, because that would be very specialist work, like you say, with immigration. That said, we do have contacts of immigration lawyers, and we can generally find the right pathway for them. So we would take that case on with the view to finding the right pathway to getting them where they need to be. Again, there's more laws come in recently regarding immigration and domestic abuse, so it's giving these women more rights to remain in this country or leave to remain. So things are going in the right direction. But yes, we wouldn't turn anyone away, but it may be in a more specialist case that we had to find the right person to signpost them onto, or sort of pass over the case once we got to a certain level.
So there aren't any restrictions on that, because our Amnesty work has included the rights of asylum seekers and refugee women who have no recourse to public funds.
Yeah. We have quite often women with no recourse to public funds. We can get them in refuge. We can, yes, we can help them.
Thank you. More questions, anybody? Rowena?
I'm a bit shocked by one of the statements you made. Well, I'm shocked by a lot of the things you said.
Yeah, sorry, I hope I haven't given everyone nightmares tonight.
But I'm quite perturbed at the thought that any of our friends who we might have known for a long time might be subject to domestic abuse. And I think anyone would be disturbed to think that, you know, we all would imagine ourselves to be kind of nice people,
Yeah.
that our friends didn't feel able to tell us.
Well, perhaps I can answer that from a survivor's perspective, because I was a victim of domestic abuse, yeah, I've got a lifelong restraining order now and all sorts, so it was very violent domestic abuse. And I was lucky in that I had a good circle of friends and I had young children, so I saw those circle of friends quite a lot, and I managed to hide it from them for probably 3 years. It only came out when things were so bad that my neighbour called the police, and then, you know, once police cars arrive outside your house, there's not much you can keep secret anymore. But I would say I was functioning, I was holding down a job. People would probably say I was quite a jolly, upbeat sort of person. You know, us ladies are so good at putting on that brave face, and appearance's sake, you know, I'm thinking back to the lieutenant's wife that I told you about, and again, a couple of clients that have been really well heeled, really smart, really, you know, you look at them and think, wow, they've got a successful life, and the things that are going on behind closed doors, you know, unbelievable. So I think it's our own pride. It's, you know, you know what us ladies like. You can have a row with your husband and you just be going out and you'd be really cross with him, but the minute you get to see friends and you're at a dinner party, it's like, oh yes, you know, we all do it. It's kind of a bit politeness in a way, isn't it? We put on that front, and I think there's a lot of that, particularly with women. And, you know, yeah, it's very possible that a good friend of yours could be suffering. So again, all I say is it's communication. It's to everyone, you know, just be open and chat. And if they do seem a bit down, you know, is there a reason for that? And the question that we say at the hospital, when I'm doing the training at the hospital, to ask is do you feel safe at home? Well, obviously you'd have to have a bit of a kind of thing that something was going on to say, do you feel safe at home? But there's nothing wrong in saying, is everything okay at home? You know, it's not a rude question. And again, we say when we're doing the training, you know, when you ask that question, statistically it will take someone about 7 times being asked directly before they will actually say, actually, yeah, things aren't good. So if you've got someone you've got a bit of a worry or a niggle about, and things are adding up, and maybe you've seen behaviour with a neighbour maybe, or at a party or a barbecue, remember those, you know, and you might have just got a few flags going off, just keep asking, you know, every time you see them, are you right at home, is everything okay? Because it will take, you know, you're unlikely to get that disclosure straight off first time you ask. So, you know, and actually if your gut's telling you something's wrong, and more than likely is, you know, it's something we keep very hidden. I remember doing a training up at the registry office. I say I'll go anywhere, I'll talk to anyone, me. And I actually had 3 people approach me afterwards. The last person was a man who'd been stood in the corner, and I could see he was really upset, really visibly upset. And he came over to me and he said, what you've described is what happened to my daughter. And his daughter's husband had taken her away the other end of the country, done the whole isolation thing, wouldn't let them speak on the phone. And he'd had one tearful phone call from his daughter, and he'd raced up there and rescued her. And then it had all come out what had been happening to her. And he was just devastated. And, you know, and he said, but we never knew. And then afterwards, one of the colleagues said to me, my goodness, I've worked with him for 10 years. I worked with him all the time that was happening. He never let on at work. We never knew that he was having all those, you know, and we would have supported him. We'd have liked to support him. So again, even from a male perspective, I think we all like to put that impression that everything's fine and dandy. It's just about being a good friend and a good communicator, and not being afraid to say, are you okay? Is everything all right?
Right, good advice. Thank you.
More questions coming? I'd just like to ask about refugees. I'm always worried that we haven't got enough refugees.
We certainly haven't. Again, luckily in our area, there's a most wonderful refuge just opened up last week in Woking. So, but that won't be necessarily for people in our area. That'll be people coming outside the areas. There's a lot of money been put into that, a lot of fundraising, that they've got flats big enough for people with sort of larger families, and all sorts of things. So that's very well funded. The true reality about refuge is they're not often that nice. You know, not a place you'd really choose to go unless you're absolutely a desperation point. Not only have you left your school, your work, your home, your family, you know, that they're not particularly swish or flashy places. Often the other women in there have got problems. We just talked about drug and alcohol and that kind of thing, or mental health problems. You know, it's not ideal. That said, you're safe and you're away from it, and there will be refuge workers that will help build you up, make sure you get public funding, make sure, you know, that after the 6 months they can move you on into housing, help you with employment. So I mean, there is help. It's just there's not enough refuges, and they're not particularly well equipped. Again, there is a refuge in Guildford, and we often deal with them. Our clients will often give baby clothes and equipment and things for, you know, for mums arriving in refuge. So you know, we help with a lot of that, and we get quite a lot of inquiries about, can I send something to refuge, can I donate to refuge? That works alongside us, but it's in a way kind of, even though it's our local refuge, it's not for our local people, because it will be people coming from different areas. But yes, we definitely need more refuges in this country. Like I say, there's more donkey sanctuaries than refuges. That's a bit of a sad fact, really. But you know, refuges are, I think sometimes it's almost, I don't know, easily, or we can get you to refuge. It really is a last resort thing. You know, it's not pleasant for the family involved.
Children couldn't go to the same school. They couldn't be in the same area, could they? That's right. And you know, often they might be, I don't know, used to a 3-bedroom home, and they're in one room with their mum, and they're not allowed to flee with their favourite toys. Or, you know, I had a family that she had 4 children, and he drove her to work, he picked her up from work, he went off and did an early morning shift, and his mother used to come around and sit in the house to make sure she didn't leave the house. I mean, the whole thing, she couldn't move anywhere. And we managed to get her a refuge space, which was difficult for someone with 4 children. It was like a military operation. We had to let all the schools know, because Granny was involved in taking the children to school, so they had to go to school that day, but we liaised with the schools and were able to take them straight out. Her sister had to pack 1 suitcase, that's all she could carry, with stuff for the 4 kids and her. So she just bought them all new pajamas and a little teddy bear each, and that was basically it. And they had to go with that, you know. That's leaving a home full of your toys and going with 1 suitcase. I mean, really, really hard. And he tried to track her, you know, right to the other end of the country, but everything worked out okay in the end for her. But, you know, it's a real last resort. I would rather concentrate on trying to prevent it and trying to catch it earlier. I think early intervention is the way to go, because when you're at that point where you are leaving everything just to be safe, it's dire, really. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Are there any more questions? What we need, I think, though, is to know where people should look for
Hand up, son.
to donate.
Hands.
Sorry.
There's hands up.
There's
I
a
can
hand
see.
up. So sorry,
Ruth-
Steve.
Ruth's
I
got
didn't
her
see your
hand
hand. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's just that obviously we discussed. I'm a councillor on the executive of Waverley Council, and when we were elected in May 2019, there was a sort of whole discussion about refuges, and you know, and this whole question of availability of refuges, and you know, understand that it's not necessarily providing for the local area and so on. But I suppose my question is, and it's a sort of fairly open question, is what can local authorities like Waverley Borough Council, like Guildford Borough Council do to support the provision of refuges, and what do good councils do to support the provision of refuges within a locality?
I don't know the answer to that one. All I know, the only one I've been involved in that I know about is, say, this brand new one in Woking, and I know that a lot of the funding for that came from, not from the council, it came from outside sources, if you like. So I don't know what local councils can do. I mean, often it's the case of the property, especially in this area, which costs so much, of course, when, you know, this area of the country, you're talking millions for properties that are suitable. But I guess I guess you've got to think, like you say, if we have one here, then you hope other areas where our local people will flee to will have suitable ones as well. It's about maybe highlighting the complete lack over the country of them, and, you know, the valuable work they do. And again, especially with a lot of our people with no recourse to public funds, you know, the refuges that will take in people no matter what their circumstances, and help them with their immigration status, and, you know, get them basically back on their feet again. And I think it's just lobbying and awareness, and maybe someone picking up the cause and saying, why haven't we got a refuge in Waverley, and, you know, is that something we could provide, even if it's a small one, you know, because some of them will take 20 families, some will only take 3 or 4 families, but every room is precious. And, you know, every time we try and find a refuge space, again, it's a bit of a misnomer that someone needs refuge, we can get them there tomorrow. Sometimes we might have to wait up to 2 weeks to find a refuge with a suitable space, because they all have different criteria. Some will accept people with drug and alcohol problems, some won't, some will accept families, some won't, maybe children only under 5, or, you know, there's all sorts of different sort of criteria to be met, and then they have to have a space, of course. So yeah, it needs some lobbying and some just awareness that there's a vast hole missing for safe places for people to go.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's just the fact in Waverley, for example, Waverley owns, because we have social housing, we've got council housing. I mean, we own 5,000 homes in Waverley. I mean, the idea that perhaps one of them, you know, could potentially be designated as a refuge would be possibly something that could potentially be helpful, I would guess.
Absolutely. And, you know, saying that, 5,000 homes, 5,000 families, and then if you think of the statistic that 1 in 4 women in their lifetime will experience domestic abuse, you know, clearly just with 5,000 homes there's a need there. So yeah, any help I could give you if you wanted to push that forward, I will. I don't know how you even begin to go about it, but you know, we certainly can give our statistics, and you know, be happy to get on board with anything that you were wanting to push forward.
That'd be great. Yeah.
What's Joe's surname?
Yeah. Have we got the contact?
You've got my contact. We don't use our surnames.
No, of course.
Obviously, we do get repercussions and people after us, because we try not to be too visible.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I'm just thinking, if, for example, you would sort of agree to talk to our executive of the council.
I would agree to talk to anyone. I'm very passionate about the cause, and I will talk to anyone. And I you know, sometimes talk too much, I'm aware, but it's something that I really believe in. So yes, I'd be happy to talk to anyone.
Great. So we actually know where to send money.
Right.
Shall I just?
Yes. Shall I send you an email tomorrow, because it'll have like account numbers and things, and probably easy, and then you can distribute it if you want.
That would be the
best.
best.
Okay.
Yes, and then I can send it out to all and
that would be lovely. And thank you everyone for listening. And you know, I guess please don't have nightmares, because I promise you, for every horror story I've told you, there are really good outcomes. And there are, you know, funny enough, I said to our ladies at Christmas, we had a Christmas do by Zoom, which was a new one. And I said to them all, have a good rest over Christmas. I said, but, you know, I know there's going to be loads more clients in January, but they're really lucky because they're in Surrey and they've got an excellent service with excellent ladies looking after them. All the agencies are on board. You know, there's a lot of support. So that is the positive. We do get huge success stories, and that's why we do it. So it's all about getting the awareness out there, and we can get more and more success stories.
That's great. Thank you very, very much, Jo, for spending all your evening doing this, because you must be very, very busy.
That's okay.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks all for listening. Bye-bye.
And thank you, everybody who has come. I don't know, somebody was trying to get through, and they're all Marilyn and Bob's, of course. I don't know who they are. I don't know who this person was trying to get through there. I can't find out now. I expect I shall hear about it.
Okay, I'm going to leave the chat now. So bye bye,
Yes.
everyone.
Fine. Thank you very, very much. Bye. And thanks everybody for coming.
That was really good.
Yeah.
Really awful.
Yeah.
You know,
It was pretty awful, wasn't it, for an International Women's Day? Not a very joyous event, but I think a necessary one. And I know that when I was in touch with the woman who is on a trustee for this particular outfit once before, they were pretty desperate at the time, and that was at the beginning of lockdown. And they said that they were expecting more work than they could cope with even then. But we have a much better report, really, on all the different services that they do run. So I don't know how she's managing it, but she's still hopeful. Anyway,